You know that feeling. You're trying to solve a tough problem at work, maybe um, figure out why something isn't clicking, or even just remember where on earth you put your keys this morning.
Oh, definitely. And you can almost feel your brain, churning away or maybe feeling a bit stuck sometimes.
Exactly. That internal world, the way our minds actually process information, make connections, come up with solutions, or maybe struggle to, it's incredibly complex and fascinating.
Absolutely. And that's really what this deep dive is all about today. We're going to take a closer look at this amazing, intricate world of how we think in our cognitive processes.
Yeah, we've pulled together some really insightful research and articles that try to unpack how our minds work.
We're looking at everything from the real basics, like memory and how we form ideas, all the way up to more complex things like creativity and how we actually solve problems.
Right. And our goal here really is to distill the most important insights from all this material. We want to help you understand how your own mind processes information, how you make decisions, tackle problems.
And why understanding this stuff is, well, frankly, more important than ever. Especially in today's world, things changing so fast, particularly at work.
Definitely. So let's unpack this. Okay, so maybe let's start by setting the scene a bit. Why is understanding cognition, so critical right now?
Well, the material we looked at immediately connects these cognitive processes to the huge shifts happening around us. You hear terms like the Fourth Industrial Revolution or Industry 4.0.
Right, 4IR. It's all about increased connectivity, loads more collaboration, not just between people, but with tech like AI.
Exactly, and just a constant flood of information, isn't it?
Yeah.
And all this changes what's demanded of us. The research highlights a growing need for what they call higher-order cognitive skill.
Okay, like what specifically?
Things like really strong analytical thinking, being able to make sharp decisions, genuine creativity, and the ability to tackle completely new problems you haven't seen before.
These aren't just nice to haves anymore, are they? They're becoming core skills for navigating complexity, for actually using technology well.
Precisely. And central to boosting these skills is a concept called metacognition.
Metacognition. Okay.
It sounds complex, but it's basically the ability to monitor and control your own thoughts and thinking processes.
Ah, so thinking about how you think.
Exactly that. It's
Yeah.
being aware, for instance, that maybe you're stuck going in circles when trying to solve something. Or consciously thinking, okay, how might my words land with this person?
Right, being more intentional.
Yes.
Yeah.
By becoming more aware of our internal mental processes, we can actually work on improving them.
And I guess from an organizational point of view, this understanding is vital too.
Huge. The material points out that grasping how people think, how they decide things, how they learn, it's key for building strong teams. Everything from selecting the right people to placing them well, promotions, helping people develop.
Yeah, makes sense. Understanding the cognitive engine helps you tune it better. Okay, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of thinking itself. The deep dive starts with how thinking often just begins kind of undirected, like daydreaming or just, thoughts flowing.
Right, which, as the material notes, can sometimes spark creativity, that sort of free association.
But it can also just be, well, noise, unproductive mental wandering.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of productive thinking comes in. It's defined as thinking that actively makes new connections, builds new relationships with knowledge you already possess.
So it's more directed, building something.
Yes, it forms the foundation for other cognitive processes. And the real basic building block for a lot of this is concept formation.
Concept formation, how we form ideas about things.
Pretty much. How we develop our unique ideas about, say, objects or people or events. It happens by observing things, noticing similar features, abstracting those features, and then grouping them into categories.
So a concept is like a mental file folder for a category.
That's a good way to put it. Like the concept of dog or chair or justice. And within those concepts, we have different ways of representing them. The material talks about prototypes and schemas.
Okay, prototypes. Is that like the most typical example, the classic image that pops into your head?
Exactly, the most representative sample of a category. So the prototype for bird might be something like a robin, not necessarily a penguin or an ostrich, even though they're birds too.
Right. And a schema is broader, more like a general framework.
Yeah, schema is a more general mental structure. It's like a plan or a set of rules we use for organizing information and classifying things. It captures what's common across all members, even the less typical ones.
So using the bird example, the schema would include flight, feathers, nests, even if some birds don't fit all parts perfectly.
Precisely. It extracts the common essence. And what's really fascinating, and the material emphasizes this, is how much culture shapes these concepts and schemas.
Ah, yeah. What's considered normal or even intelligent behavior can vary hugely, can't it?
Massively. How we interpret information, even test questions, can be influenced by our cultural background, what counts as polite, what's seen as clever. Western cultures might emphasize speed and verbal skill, while some Eastern or African societies might place more value on, say, listening skills, social harmony, or cooperation.
So these mental structures, these prototypes and schemas, they aren't rigid boxes.
Not at all. They're active, they're interactive, they're flexible, sensitive to context, constantly being built upon and refined by our prior knowledge and experiences.
And how we use these concepts to categorize and organize information has a massive impact on something else fundamental, memory.
Absolutely. Memory.
Hmm.
The materialist describes it as like the mind's vast storeroom. It holds everything, our experiences, what we've learned, our evaluations, prior knowledge,
Okay.
everything.
It's totally fundamental, isn't it? Without memory, learning new things, doing your job effectively, staying safe, solving problems, none of it works.
It all breaks down. And the research breaks down memory into these key stages. This model is actually pretty well supported by um, studies looking at people who've had brain injuries and seeing what functions are affected.
Okay, so what are the stages?
First up is sensory memory. This holds incoming sensory infosites, sounds, smells, but only for a tiny fraction of a second.
Like the trail of a sparkler, or quickly scanning a room to see what grabs your attention.
Exactly. Just long enough for the brain to select what's important. What you do pay attention to then moves into short-term memory, which is often called working memory now.
Working memory. That's the stuff you're actively thinking about right now.
Yes, information currently being processed, but, and this is key, it has a really limited capacity.
Right, the classic example is trying to remember a phone number someone just told you. About 7 digits, maybe?
Around that, yeah. And it doesn't last long either, maybe 15 to 30 seconds, unless you actively do something to keep it there, like repeating it.
Because new information just pushes the old stuff out.
Exactly. It's constantly being overwritten. But we have a useful trick called chunking.
Ah, chunking. Grouping items together into meaningful units.
Precisely. So instead of remembering individual letters like CIA, FBI, you remember two chunks, CIA and FBI, or remembering a phone number by grouping the digits. It lets us effectively hold more in our working memory.
Okay, so sensory, then working memory, and then the big one, long-term memory.
That's the one. Seemingly limitless capacity where information can be stored for, well, potentially a lifetime. But getting information into long-term memory, encoding it, and getting it back out retrieval, that's the process.
And how does stuff get encoded well?
Encoding based on meaning semantic coding is really important for long-term storage. This relates to general knowledge about the world, facts, concepts, like knowing Paris as the capital of France or how to use a computer mouse. It's not tied to a specific time or place you learned it.
And within long-term memory, there are different types, right?
Yes, there's declarative memory, which is stuff you can consciously recall. And that breaks down further into episodic memory, your personal experiences, like remembering your graduation day, complete with sights, sounds, feelings, where and when it happened.
Very specific personal events.
Exactly. And semantic memory, which is that general world knowledge we just talked about, facts, vocabulary, concepts.
Got it. Declarative is conscious recall. What's the other type?
Implicit memory, sometimes called non-declarative. This is where past experiences influence your behavior without you consciously remembering the experience itself.
Like what?
Like riding a bike.
Mm.
Or maybe performing a complex work procedure you've done many times so you could just do it smoothly without consciously recalling learning each individual step. Procedural memory is a big part of this.
Okay, that makes sense. So how can we actually improve our memory? The material must have had tips.
Oh yes, lots of practical stuff. And it connects to the idea that memory has a physical basis, like neurons strengthening connections when you revisit information, an idea going back to Hebb.
So what works?
Elaborative rehearsal is a big one. That means connecting new information to things you already know really well, making meaningful links.
Like relating a new management theory to a situation you actually experienced at work.
Exactly. Or linking historical events to things happening in the news today. It makes the new stuff stickier. Mnemonics are also useful, especially for lists or unrelated facts.
Mnemonics, like rhymes or acronyms.
Yeah, songs, acronyms like ROYG, BIV for the colors of the rainbow, associating items with places in a familiar location, the method of loci. The material had a neat example for remembering names,
Oh, yeah.
linking a name to a visual image or object. Like if you meet someone named Yan, picture them holding yarn, or Peter holding a pizza. Sounds silly, but it works.
I might have to try that. What else?
Just basic organization helps a lot. Breaking down large amounts of information into smaller, logical sections, like chapters in a textbook.
And chunking, which we mentioned for short-term memory, helps in encoding for long-term, too, remembering things as a single unit.
Your mood state can surprisingly play a role, too. There's some evidence for mood congruence. You might recall information better if your mood when you retrieve it matches your mood when you learned it.
Huh, interesting. Like remembering a frustrating customer service call better when you're feeling annoyed again.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Also, using humor or exaggeration when you first learn something can make it more memorable. Funny or bizarre images tend to stand out.
Okay, these are great general tips. What about specific study techniques for people listening who might be learning new things?
Yeah, the material had some good ones, like actively making up questions about the material and trying to answer them, using mind maps that combine words and pictures.
Visual and verbal, using both channels.
Right. Actively associating new information with your existing knowledge, using visual images or related words. Taking short breaks during study sessions, but recalling what you just learned before the break.
Oh, that's a good tip. Solidify it before pausing.
And even studying in different locations can help. It makes your recall less dependent on the specific cues of one environment.
Okay, lots of ways to boost memory, but inevitably we forget things. Why does that happen?
Forgetting. Yeah, it's the flip side. Sometimes the stored information degrades, or we just can't retrieve it, even though it might still be in there somewhere. Cues can help trigger retrieval, but sometimes it just doesn't work.
So what causes forgetting?
Interference is a major factor. There are two types. Proactive interference is when old learning gets in the way of remembering new stuff.
Like trying to remember your new password, but your old one keeps popping into your head.
Exactly. Or mixing up procedures for a new software system with how you did it on the old one.
Okay. And the other type?
Retroactive interference. That's when new learning hinders the recall of older information. So after learning the new software system really well, you might find it hard to remember how the old one worked at all.
Right. The new overwrites the old.
Then there's motivated forgetting. This is more psychological, consciously or unconsciously pushing away unpleasant or unwanted memories or feelings.
Like conveniently forgetting a dentist appointment you're dreading.
Or maybe avoiding calling back a client you had a difficult interaction with. The material notes this can sometimes safeguard mental health by helping focus on positives. But obviously, forgetting important information because it's tied to something uncomfortable can have negative consequences. There was a specific point about focusing on positive memories, potentially reducing anxiety, while negative memories can sometimes become overly accessible.
That's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
What else leads to forgetting?
Distortion is another one. Over long periods, we can forget essential details of an event, or the memory can subtly change. This is really relevant when recalling events for, say, a disciplinary hearing, or even just a performance evaluation discussion years later.
Details get fuzzy or mixed up.
Yeah, and related to distortion or false memories. These can happen when our existing schemas or general knowledge frameworks interfere with recalling a specific event accurately.
Like your schema for a typical workday, making you misremember details about a specific day that deviated from the norm.
Precisely. Your brain fills in the gaps with what usually happens. And finally, as we touched on with encoding, mood can interfere if your state during recall doesn't match the state during encoding, or simply if you weren't paying enough attention when the memory was formed.
Okay, so memory stores the info.
Yeah.
How do we then use language to connect, express these ideas, and interact?
Language. Yeah, it's described as both an inborn cognitive ability and something that's learned. And it's deeply tied up with memory, obviously.
The material mentioned the interactionist or transactional theory.
Right. This view emphasizes that language development isn't just nature or nurture. It's a product of the constant interaction between our innate capacity for language and our environment, especially our caregivers and social interactions.
So it's a back and forth process.
Exactly. The child babbles, the parent responds with words, the child tries to imitate. It's this cyclical, reciprocal social process that drives language acquisition.
And the quality of that early environment matters a lot.
Hugely. The research suggests that the quality of a child's home learning environment, things like exposure to books, engaging activities, rich conversation versus maybe just passive screen time, is a really strong predictor of their readiness for school.
The dive also mentioned challenges, didn't it? Things that can hinder language development.
Yes, particularly relevant in diverse societies like South Africa, which was a focus in the source material. Factors like socioeconomic status, poverty, malnutrition, or learning in a second or third language can all present significant challenges.
There was also a distinction made between everyday language and academic language.
Right. Academic language is often more demanding, it's more abstract, less tied to immediate context, uses more complex sentence structures, and specific vocabulary for different subjects. The suggestion was that language development should be actively integrated with academic learning, not treated as separate.
And then the elephant in the room, social media's impact on language.
Yes. A whole new dimension. The material points out how it's changing vocabulary, introducing new words or new meanings for old words. Think LOL, TTYL, troll, pinning something, FaceTime.
And just the sheer speed and volume of communication has increased.
Definitely. It also provides informal exposure to languages, like English across different cultures, with easy switching and automated translation tools.
But it doesn't really teach the formal rules of grammar or structure, does it?
Not typically, no.
Yeah.
It's more informal, evolving.
What about bilingualism? Does speaking more than one language affect thinking?
It seems so. Research suggests that managing two language systems simultaneously can actually boost certain cognitive skills called executive functions.
Executive functions, like planning and attention.
Yes, things like controlling attention, planning, mental flexibility, categorizing information, and importantly, inhibiting inappropriate responses. Bilingual individuals seem to develop this executive control a bit earlier in life and might maintain it longer than monolinguals.
Are there any downsides?
Well, some studies suggest bilinguals might sometimes be slightly slower in tasks that require very rapid word retrieval in one specific language compared to a monolingual speaker of that language. But the executive function benefits are pretty well documented.
And I guess in organizations, language is crucial for just getting everyone on the same page. Vision, values, project goals.
Absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
Though, as the material notes, linguistic ability is just one facet of the broader concept of intelligence.
Right. Which brings us to that really big, maybe even tricky question. What does it actually mean to be intelligent?
Yeah, it's complex. There's no single, universally agreed upon definition. But functionally, it often revolves around the ability to learn from experience, think logically or rationally, solve problems effectively, and adapt to the surrounding environment.
But what's considered intelligent behavior can look very different depending on the culture, can't it?
Hugely different. The material highlights this really well. Western perspectives often emphasize cognitive aspects like speed of processing, verbal fluency, memory capacity, logical reasoning.
Things often measured in traditional tests.
Exactly. Whereas in many Eastern or African societies, the concept of intelligence might more strongly incorporate social skills, benevolence, humility, wisdom, cooperativeness, the ability to listen well, and contribute to group harmony and social responsibility.
So being smart isn't just about individual cognitive power in those contexts.
Not solely, no. Social and ethical dimensions can be just as, if not more, important. The material gave examples from Chinese culture valuing benevolence and humility, and African societies emphasizing harmony and listening.
So given these diverse views, what's the modern perspective on intelligence according to this dive?
There seems to be growing agreement that intelligence isn't some fixed quantity you're born with. There's a much stronger emphasis now on lifelong learning and recognizing that intelligence goes way beyond what a conventional IQ test could measure.
And there's a shift towards potential.
Yes, especially in societies with significant educational inequalities, like South Africa again. The focus is shifting towards assessing a person's potential to learn and adapt, rather than just measuring the abilities they've already developed, which are heavily influenced by past opportunities.
Looking back historically, some early figures recognized this, didn't they? Like Alfred Binet.
Right. Binet, who developed one of the first general ability tests to identify children needing educational support, crucially believed that intelligence was malleable, that it could be improved with the right interventions. And that view is very much alive today.
Early IQ tests used that mental age versus chronological age formula.
They did. Stern's formula. But it doesn't work well for adults because cognitive development doesn't proceed at the same rate throughout life, and individual differences become much wider.
So how are adult IQ scores typically derived now?
David Wessler developed tests with different tasks for adults and children and used the concept of a deviation IQ. It basically compares an individual's score to the average score of people in their own age group, based on a normal distribution curve. Most people fall in the average range, around 90-109.
But the material still urged caution about using these scores for labeling.
Absolutely. Caution against rigidly labeling people as gifted or intellectually disabled based solely on an IQ score. The emphasis today is much more on identifying needs and developing potential.
There was also mention of the dredge theory.
Ah, yes. The idea that extraordinary achievement isn't just about innate talent or high IQ, it's strongly linked to incredible determination, thousands of hours of intensive training, deliberate practice, and sheer hard work.
So practice and perseverance are huge factors in high-level performance.
Definitely. Eminent scientists, artists, athletes, they typically put in vastly more hours of focused practice than their peers.
Okay, so how do psychologists approach understanding intelligence now? The material mentioned different approaches.
Broadly, yes. One is the structural or psychometric approach. This focuses on what intelligence is made of its underlying components or factors and how much of it a person has. It relies heavily on tests and statistical analysis.
Like Spearman's G factor, the idea of a general intelligence.
Exactly. Spearman proposed a general intelligence that underlies performance on various tasks plus specific abilities. Thurstone proposed several primary mental abilities like verbal comprehension, numerical ability, spatial reasoning. These often show up in job analysis, actually.
And others built on these ideas.
Yes, people like Vernon proposed hierarchical models trying to synthesize these views. Cattell distinguished between fluid intelligence, the ability to reason abstractly and flexibly, think on your feet, and crystallized intelligence, accumulated knowledge, facts, and skills learned over time. Guilford proposed a complex structure of intellect model with 120 different abilities based on operations, contents, and products.
So that's the what and how much approach. What's the
Yeah.
alternative?
The other main approach is more dynamic. It focuses less on fixed structures and more on how intelligence is used in context, its quality, and its potential for development, its malleability.
And a key figure here is Vygotsky.
Lev Vygotsky, yes.
Yeah.
He emphasized that intelligence develops through social and cultural interaction by observing others, internalizing actions, and learning through guidance.
Which leads to his concept of the zone of proximal development, the ZPD.
Exactly. The ZPD is the gap between what a person can currently do independently and what they could potentially achieve with guidance from a more knowledgeable other or through supportive learning opportunities.
Yeah.
It focuses on what a person can become.
And this directly informs learning potential testing.
Precisely. Learning potential assessment is based on the ZPD. It assumes cognitive abilities can change and improve given better conditions or targeted learning. It often uses a test-teach-retest procedure.
So you measure baseline, provide some learning or coaching, then measure again.
Yes, and the difference between the initial score and the post-learning score gives an indication of their capacity to learn and adapt their learning potential. It's different from a static IQ test, which measures more crystallized, already developed abilities.
How is this useful?
The material argues it can be a fair assessment tool, especially in diverse societies where educational backgrounds vary widely. It focuses on the ability to benefit from learning opportunities, which can sometimes predict future academic or job performance better than just looking at past results or static IQ scores.
Right.
There was an ethical consideration highlighted here, too, about fair assessment.
Right. Beyond these main approaches, we also explored other types of intelligence that are now widely discussed. Emotional intelligence, EI.
Hugely important. The ability to monitor and manage your own emotions, stay motivated, understand and empathize with others' emotions, and manage relationships effectively.
And this isn't just soft skills, is it? It involves cognitive processes.
Absolutely. Reasoning about emotions, making decisions based on emotional information, problem solving in social situations, communicating effectively. These are all cognitive activities within EI. And research strongly suggests EI is crucial for success, often as much as or more than traditional IQ. And importantly, it can be learned and developed through things like coaching and training.
Okay, EI. What else?
Contextual intelligence, building on Robert Sternberg's work. This emphasizes the role of experience and how intelligence is valued differently depending on the context or environment.
Sternberg talked about 3 types needed for successful intelligence.
Yes, analytical intelligence, the abstract reasoning, typically valued in school. Creative intelligence, generating novel ideas, dealing with new situations. And practical intelligence, the ability to solve everyday problems, adapting to the demands of your job or daily life. Street smarts, basically.
And he saw creativity as closely linked.
Very much so. Finding problems, evaluating potential ideas, and then making those ideas useful and implementing them in a real-world context.
And finally, Gardner's multiple intelligences theory.
Right. Howard Gardner proposed that intelligence isn't a single entity, but consists of at least 8 relatively independent types.
Can you list them quickly?
Sure. Linguistic, word smart; logical, mathematical, number reasoning smart; spatial, picture smart; bodily kinesthetic, body smart; musical, music smart; interpersonal, people smart; intrapersonal, self smart; and naturalistic, nature smart. He later added a possible 9th, existential intelligence, thinking about ultimate issues, meaning in life, sometimes linked to spirituality.
And his evidence came from looking at diverse groups.
Yes, studying people with specific brain injuries that affected one ability but not others, looking at savants, prodigies, and considering different cultural values.
Though critics point out it's hard to test these scientifically like traditional intelligence.
That's a common critique, the lack of standardized tests for each intelligence. But the theory has been incredibly influential in education, prompting people to think about diverse talents and tailoring learning approaches.
Okay, so we have all these human cognitive processes. Memory, language, different kinds of intelligence. How does this connect to the rise of artificial intelligence, AI?
Well, it connects directly, especially within that fourth industrial revolution context we mentioned earlier. AI is essentially about creating machines, devices, robots, software that can use information, make decisions, and perform actions in ways that mimic or are inspired by human cognitive processes and biological systems.
So it's technology trying to think or act intelligently?
In a practical sense, yes. Programming machines to respond appropriately to inputs, sometimes even with foresight. We see it in machine vision, natural language processing like in chatbots or virtual assistants, robotic process automation for routine tasks, machine learning where systems learn from data, and advanced data analytics.
And this is having a real impact in the workplace, particularly in HR and management.
Definitely. The material highlighted examples like AI platforms helping source and validate talent, using data analytics to quantify employee contributions, enabling highly individualized employee development plans, and even using chatbots to gather employee insights or answer routine queries.
The idea being it frees up human employees.
That's the promise. By automating routine cognitive tasks, it frees up humans to focus on those higher-order skills: complex analysis, strategic thinking, creativity, interpersonal interaction, ethical judgment.
But ethics is a big one with AI, isn't it? The material raised concerns.
Critical concerns, yes. Questions around accessibility, who benefits from AI, integrity, can we trust its outputs, privacy, how is data being used, and a major one is algorithmic bias.
Bias. Hey.
AI learns from data, and if that data reflects existing societal biases, the AI can perpetuate or even amplify them, unintentionally excluding certain groups based on their profiles, for example.
And the black box problem. Explainability.
Right. Sometimes the AI algorithms become so complex that even the developers can't fully trace or explain why the system made a particular decision or recommendation. That lack of transparency is a significant ethical challenge.
Okay, so with all this cognitive machinery, human and potentially artificial, let's talk about putting it to work. Problem solving and decision making.
Core activities, really. Managers, employees, all of us spend a huge amount of time trying to solve problems and make decisions. Problem solving is essentially about finding effective ways to deal with obstacles or achieve goals, especially when the path isn't immediately obvious.
And in today's complex world, there are often multiple potential solutions or even opportunities disguised as problems.
Exactly. The material recommended a systematic, analytical approach as generally being most effective. It outlines several steps.
Okay, what's step one?
First, simply acknowledge that a problem exists. Don't ignore it or sweep it under the rug. Then comes what's often the most difficult step. Define and clarify the problem accurately. Really understand its nature. Where is it happening? When? Who or what does it impact? What are the boundaries?
Getting that definition wrong means you solve the wrong thing.
Precisely. Step 3 is to generate alternative solutions. Brainstorm, research, think broadly. Don't just settle on the first idea.
Step 4.
Consider the implications of each alternative. What are the likely consequences, the advantages, disadvantages, potential risks associated with each option?
Then you have to choose, right? Step 5. Decide.
Yes. Select the alternative or combination of alternatives that seems likely to produce the best outcome while managing the associated risks effectively.
Step 6. Implement the decision. Take action.
Crucial step. And finally, step 7. Reflect. Evaluate the outcome. Did the chosen solution actually solve the problem? Did we understand the problem correctly in the first place? Could the process have been better, maybe more creative? Who else should have been involved? Learning from the process is key.
And threaded through this whole process is the issue of ethics, isn't it?
Absolutely vital. Ethical considerations need to be part of every step, not just an afterthought. The material defined ethical decisions as those that are legal, fair, and respect human rights.
And it gave some stark examples of unethical decisions in organizations.
Yes, things like bribery, nepotism, corruption, people presenting false qualifications, deliberately withholding important information, breaching privacy. Unfortunately, these things happen.
So how can you check if a decision you're considering is ethical? The material offered some guiding questions.
It did. Useful prompts like, does this decision align with accepted social standards or professional codes? How would it look if it became public knowledge, reported in the media, or examined in court? Could you comfortably explain this decision to your family or people you respect? Does it align with your own core personal values? Asking these can act as an ethical filter.
Okay, going back to generating solutions.
Mm.
Step 3. What strategies do people use?
Several common ones. Sometimes it's just trial and error, randomly trying different things, especially when you have no clear idea what might work. It can be very time-consuming and haphazard, though.
A more structured approach.
Algorithms. These are systematic step-by-step procedures or rules that are guaranteed to produce a solution eventually, if followed correctly, like following a recipe or a detailed troubleshooting guide, or even a meeting agenda structure.
What about using past experience?
That's using analogy. You recognize parallels between a current problem and one you've solved before, and you adapt the previous solution. Sometimes just changing how you represent the problem, drawing it out, using graphs, can spark an analogy or clarify the situation. Reframing a problem as a challenge can also shift your thinking.
And then there are heuristics.
Right. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, rules of thumb, or best guesses based on your knowledge and experience. They help you narrow down the options quickly by considering only the most likely solutions.
Like if your flashlight stops working, you assume the batteries are dead first before checking the bulb or wiring.
Exactly. Managers use heuristics all the time because they often face time pressure and have incomplete information. They're efficient.
There's a downside.
The drawback is that relying too heavily on heuristics might cause you to overlook more creative, original, or perhaps even better solutions because you've narrowed your focus too quickly.
The material mentions specific types of heuristics.
Yes, a few common ones.
Yeah.
Anchoring and adjustment. You start with an initial estimate or anchor, like a first salary offer, and then adjust based on subsequent information. But the initial anchor can heavily influence the final decision.
Okay. What else?
The availability heuristic. You estimate how frequent or likely something is based on how easily examples come to mind. If you recently had a bad experience with a supplier, you might overestimate the likelihood of future problems and avoid them, even if statistically they're reliable. Vivid, easily recalled events can skew judgment.
Right. Memorable, but maybe rare.
And the representativeness heuristic. You judge a new situation based on how similar it seems to a prototype or stereotype you hold from the past. An HR manager might use a hiring tactic that worked well for a similar role before, assuming it will work again, even if the context or candidate pool is different.
So these shortcuts can sometimes lead us astray. What else gets in the way of good problem solving?
The main barrier highlighted was rigid or inflexible thinking. Two specific types were mentioned.
Okay.
Mental set. This is the tendency to persist in using problem-solving strategies or methods that have worked in the past, even when they're no longer appropriate for the current problem.
Like the marketing manager who only knows traditional advertising and resists using social media, even though the audience has moved online.
Perfect example. The old set way of thinking blocks seeing new possibilities. The other barrier is functional fixedness.
Functional fixedness.
This is the tendency to perceive an object only in terms of its most common or primary function and failing to see alternative uses for it.
Like thinking your personal car is only for family transport and not considering it could be used for ride-sharing to earn income.
Exactly. You're fixed on its usual function and blind to other potentials. Overcoming these kinds of rigidity often requires creativity.
Which leads us nicely into creativity itself. How did the material define that?
Creativity was defined as the ability to produce work that is both novel, meaning original, unexpected, unique, and appropriate, meaning useful, adaptive, meeting the needs of the situation or task. It's seen as an aspect of intelligence, but distinct too.
And it's obviously important, right, for individuals and organizations.
Hugely important for individual problem solving, for organizational adaptation and survival, for developing new products and services, even for job creation. Certain roles, like in marketing or design, explicitly require it.
Is creativity something some people just have, or can it be learned?
Well, there are different views. Some argue all humans have creative potential that can be unleashed or developed. Others emphasize certain personality characteristics often found in creative people, like proactivity. The relationship with intelligence is also debated. It's often associated with higher intelligence. But high intelligence doesn't guarantee creativity. Some see them as overlapping concepts involving things like flexible thinking and problem solving.
The dive mentioned divergent versus convergent thinking. That seems relevant here.
Very relevant.
Yeah.
Guilford's concepts. Divergent thinking is about moving outward from conventional knowledge, exploring multiple possibilities, generating a wide variety or novelty of ideas or solutions.
Like the classic test, how many uses can you think of for a brick?
Exactly. That's tapping divergent thinking. It's strongly associated with creativity. Convergent thinking, on the other hand, is about moving inward, combining existing ideas, using logic and established knowledge to narrow down options and find a single best or correct answer.
So convergent thinking is useful, but not necessarily creative in the novel sense.
Right. It's productive for finding known solutions, but doesn't typically foster true originality. The key insight is that we actually need both. Divergent thinking to generate possibilities, and convergent thinking to evaluate, select, and refine the best ones. Being able to switch effectively between these modes is crucial for creative problem solving.
Okay, so how does the creative process actually unfold? Is it just a sudden flash of inspiration?
Not usually, no. The material outlined a classic Western model rooted in Gestalt psychology, describing stages that often lead to that aha moment.
What are the stages?
First is preparation. This is conscious effort, immersing yourself in the problem, gathering relevant information, learning everything you can, maybe trying initial solutions that don't quite work.
So hard work up front.
Yes. Then comes incubation. This is where you set the problem aside, often unconsciously. You might engage in unrelated activities, sleep on it. Your mind continues to work on it in the background, making associations.
Letting it simmer.
Exactly. Stage 3 is illumination or inspiration. This is this sudden insight, the aha moment, where ideas that were maybe floating around suddenly connect and become coherent. A potential solution emerges into consciousness.
The light bulb moment.
Right, but it's not the end. Stage 4 is verification or elaboration. This is where you consciously scrutinize the new idea, test it out, refine it, work out the details, and turn the insight into a workable solution.
So that aha moment needs follow-through.
Absolutely. The material also noted some parallels in Eastern models, like from Indian artists, which might also include aspects of spiritual practice or achieving a sense of oneness as part of the creative journey, alongside preparation and refinement.
And it's stressed that creative thinking isn't always automatic. It needs time.
Yes, it requires allowing for that preparation and incubation. Organizations need to understand that people need time for reflection, not just constant execution. It involves a cognitive continuum, from logical systematic thinking to more intuitive associative thinking, like dreaming or using metaphors.
Does mood affect creativity?
It seems to. Research suggests a positive mood, feeling inspired, happy, optimistic, is generally positively related to creativity, especially when people are working on interesting and challenging tasks. A positive work environment can really help foster creative thinking.
Okay, any practical strategies mentioned for boosting idea generation, like in brainstorming?
Yes, some useful techniques were highlighted. Interestingly, combining individual brainstorming first, followed by group brainstorming, often delivers the best results.
Why individual first?
It allows everyone to generate ideas without immediate judgment or influence from the group, leading to a wider range of initial thoughts. Then the group session can build on, combine, and refine those ideas. Techniques mentioned included starting with silent individual writing, forcing yourself to think about how an idea could change or evolve over time, making connections between the problem and a randomly chosen object or concept, or using structured methods like SCAMPER. It's an acronym. Substitute, combine, adapt, modify, magnify, minify. Put to another use, eliminate, reverse. It forces you to systematically alter aspects of an existing idea or problem to spark new possibilities.
So structure can actually help creativity sometimes.
Yes, by prompting different ways of thinking. Working individually first, then bringing ideas to the group, seems to improve quality by generating more associations and reducing cognitive interference or groupthink early on.
What about creative people themselves? Are there common characteristics?
The material listed several traits often associated with highly creative individuals, emphasizing that creative potential can often be developed or unleashed. These include things like openness to new experiences, intelligence, though not necessarily genius-level IQ, independence, self-confidence, a willingness to take calculated risks.
A certain mindset.
Yeah, often an internal locus of control, believing they can influence outcomes, a tolerance for ambiguity and complexity, a lower need for rigid structure, and perseverance sticking with problems. They tend to enjoy exploring, experimenting, questioning norms.
There was a brief mention of right brain, left brain.
Just briefly acknowledging the popular distinction.
Yeah.
Left brain often associated with logic, sequence, language analysis. Right brain with emotion, imagination, holistic thinking, visual spatial skills, lateral thinking. Creative people are often thought to lean more towards right brain or whole brain thinking, integrating both styles.
So if you're a manager, how can you actively foster this creativity in your team?
Several key actions were suggested. Challenging employees with stimulating tasks, being an open and attentive listener to new ideas, even seemingly wild ones, allowing room for experimentation and viewing failures as learning opportunities.
Setting the tone.
Absolutely. Being a creative role model yourself, stimulating diversity of thought and perspective, maybe even changing the physical environment sometimes, stretching policies where possible, being decisive and courageous enough to trust intuition and commit resources to promising, novel ideas.
Enthusiasm matters too.
Big time. Being enthusiastic and passionate about innovation and providing positive feedback and recognition for creative efforts.
And for individuals wanting to boost their own creativity.
It starts with understanding the process we discussed, identifying personal barriers, maybe being overly critical of your own ideas, relying too much on pure logic, fear of judgment, or working in a stifling environment. Then, it's about actively practicing skills and implementing methods.
Like what?
Using imagery and visualization, creating wish lists of ideal solutions, using techniques like analogy, or deliberately taking excursions into unrelated fields for inspiration, reframing problems or evaluations, and fundamentally cultivating that personal creative drive and vision.
Okay, so pulling all these diverse threads together, memory, intelligence, problem solving, creativity, AI,
Yeah.
what's the big picture takeaway for, navigating work and life today?
I think the core message from this dive is that our cognitive functioning, how we think, learn, decide, create, is absolutely central in this knowledge-based, technology-driven world we're in now. It's not just a side issue. It's fundamental.
So for managers making hiring or promotion decisions,
They really need to consider these cognitive skills. Using assessment tools, especially things like learning potential tests in diverse contexts, can provide valuable insights beyond just past experience. Thinking about the range of intelligences needed for a role, not just one narrow definition. Ensuring a good fit between abilities and job demands.
and problem solving and decision making are just inherent parts of most jobs now.
Pretty much unavoidable. And managers play a huge role in creating the environment where effective and hopefully creative thinking can actually happen. It's not just about individual skills, it's about the context.
This also relates to knowledge management, doesn't it? How organizations use information.
Directly. Creating, sharing, and utilizing knowledge effectively relies heavily on these cognitive processes. Clear language, good problem solving, the ability to generate and implement creative ideas.
And there's almost a new expectation on employees in this 4III world.
Yes, the psychological contract is shifting. Employees are increasingly expected to learn fast, adapt, take initiative, solve complex problems, be innovative. Your cognitive potential is becoming a key competitive advantage, both for you individually and for the organizations you work for. So managers need to recognize this potential and actively engage employees in ways that utilize and develop these cognitive capabilities.
Right. So we've really taken quite a deep dive today into this incredible internal world of how our minds work, from the basics of, forming concepts and storing memories.
All the way through to the complexities of intelligence in its many forms, how we tackle problems systematically or heuristically, and how we unlock creativity.
And understanding these cognitive processes, it isn't just academic, is it? It really helps you navigate the flood of information we all face, make better decisions, enhance your own learning, and just adapt more effectively to the constant changes at work and in life.
Absolutely vital skills for today.
And thinking about everything we've discussed, the different views on what smart even means across cultures, the ethical tightropes we're walking with AI, the importance of wisdom alongside raw intelligence or creativity, it makes you wonder. Maybe the most crucial cognitive skill for the future isn't just about speed or recall.
What do you mean?
Well, perhaps it's less about how fast you can process information and more about how you choose to apply your thinking. How you use these amazing cognitive tools to solve problems ethically, to create real value in a world increasingly filled with automation, and to navigate complexity with, well, flexibility and maybe even a bit of wisdom.
That's a really interesting thought. It brings it back to purpose and values. So maybe the final question for you listening is, in this rapidly changing landscape, what does intelligence in its broadest sense really mean to you? How do you want to use your thinking power?